Hi, and welcome back to Family Sociology. We started the chapter on history, culture, and Canadian families with a review of important sociological terms and concepts to assist with the understanding of cultural history of the diversity of Canadian families. So here we are in part 2, and we're going to do a quick review of the Canadian population and its makeup and history. So let's get started. We're going to start with the Indigenous peoples. Indigenous, by definition, is a person who is First Nations, Inuit, or Métis. Indigenous families consist of parents and children living together in a household, but also the extended family networks, where storytelling and other community support practices have helped the Indigenous population begin to reclaim their health and community. From the first Indigenous people who arrived thousands of years ago, the area that is now Canada has been populated by waves of immigrants. The social structure and cultural norms and values have changed with each passing wave. With ongoing discriminatory practices, Indigenous people have, unfortunately, very low high school graduation rates, higher rates of obesity, and other health risks. Now you'll see on page 38, figure 2.3, where journalist Terry Glavin compiled data on Canadian Indigenous population and African American populations as a comparative. The Indigenous population is growing nearly 6 times faster than the Canadian population as a whole, especially in the Métis community. Younger population is what is the result. More are of childbearing age. More individuals are identifying as Indigenous. Now that's not a very complete example, but I am just doing a review, and we're going to move on to the English and French Canadians, where the character of English Canadian society has roots in Britain. Canada has become part of the British Empire as a result of conquest and colonization. In the early English immigrants, Scots, this was around the 1700s, and the Irish in around 1840, followed British common law. Chief responsibility was the nuclear family members. Quebec government encouraged a society that mirrored France and discouraged dissonance, and was heavily influenced by the Roman Catholic Church based on 4 elements. 1, the Roman Catholic Church defined family and educational goals. 2, rural lifestyle was central. 3, large families were ideal. And 4, the underpinning of French language and culture. Now, only the importance of the French language remained unchanged, but it was made centrally only to Quebec society rather than to French Canadian culture as a whole. From the 1960s, the Quiet Revolution, the authority of the Roman Catholic Church was dissipated. The industrial economy replaced rural lifestyle. Large families curtailed by the sexual revolution and contraceptive advances. The provincial government took over social services, and Quebec's family support program have become some of the strongest in all of Canada. Other immigrant groups we can look at, the diversity of Canada's population will continue to increase significantly over the next decades. 2011, the census counted 200 plus ethnic origins. By 2031, about 25 to 28% will be foreign-born, about half from Asia, and about 30% will belong to a visible minority, nearly double the proportion reported in the 2006 census. The vast majority of visible minorities will live in cities, making up about 63% of Toronto, 59% of Vancouver, 31% of Montreal populations by 2031. An increasing number of Canadians report belonging to more than one ethnic group. So why would that be? Well, there's a big increase in mixed race families, and so that would make one explanation. There's marriages and common law unions between non-visible minorities and individuals who are of visible minorities. Children born to such parents would be shared biracially. Children adopted internationally or transracially within Canada has had a big impact. So clearly, our diversity is expressed in our families and will continue to affect family dynamics. Since there are so many different factors that can and do affect immigration, let's consider the patterns of immigration. Mixed-race couples experience difficulties arising from different cultural traditions and from prejudice of relatives. Pre-1900, many newcomers came from Britain and the United States, and for many years after, federal and provincial governments deterred immigration of non-white and members of certain religious groups. However, the desire to keep Canada British conflicted with the need for labor. There was a lot of work being done in mining, lumber, railway construction, and there weren't enough Canadians to do the work. This included bringing in Japanese, Sikh, and Chinese workers to do the work British immigrants would not do. Additional immigration in the 1890s, 1890 to 1914, they were predominantly from European countries to continue with the industrial cheap labor. In the boom times, which was basically after World War II, both employers and the federal government sponsored the influx of workers. During recessions and the Great Depression, immigration was discouraged. By 1967, immigration in Canada adopted a point system of qualifying for immigration, and it was an attempt to reduce prejudice and discrimination from the process of selecting immigrants, and to promote a more objective approach, and it seemed to work. Many groups also admitted to Canada for humanitarian reasons. Now, there is a term that's known as fugitive slaves who escaped from the U.S. to Canada once slavery was banned here in 1793 and was abolished in 1834. What's interesting is the role that Owen Sound played in some of that period of time of slaves escaping. We next just summarized the changes to citizenship and immigration since World War II, and we'll begin in 1947 when the Canadian Citizenship Act was created, and it made changes to our status as British subjects. This act allowed married women to be citizens on their own rather than being tied to their husbands. During the early 1960s, new regulations were introduced to reduce discrimination of unsponsored immigrants. As long as the immigrant had work or a job waiting for them, and they were not criminals or terrorists or had any infectious diseases and not a risk to public safety, they were welcome in. In 1997, the Citizenship Act allowed for dual citizenship. And then by 2014, the Citizenship Act made some of the most comprehensive changes aimed at speeding things up, reducing fraud, and recognizing those who serve Canada. Currently, immigration uses 4 categories to which to apply for immigration for permanent residency. First is the family class, and this includes spouse and or a partner, children, and parents, grandparents, or other relatives can sponsor someone to come over and be an immigrant. The second class is the economic class, skilled workers, entrepreneurs, and investors. That's the second category. The third, refugee class, immigration based on a well-founded fear of persecution from the country of origin because of race, religion, nationality, or membership in a particular social group or political opinion. And then there's a fourth class, and this is under the other immigrants, and includes those who are admitted on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. Generally, on the whole, 62% are based on economic class and 27% on family class. That was as of 2013. To see how the pattern of immigration has changed over time from 1981 to 2011, we can look at what the experience of these newcomers are, and you'll find that image in your textbook. So what is the experience of newcomers? Well, there are as many experiences as there are immigrants, so there's not a universal experience. However, there is data, remember the research, and we can derive some common factors. Many immigrants see Canada as the promised land of opportunity and of hope. The types of policies in place at time of arrival either will facilitate and make this possible or can complicate this adaptation. Official policy of multiculturalism is promoted through public recognition and funding of ethnic diversity. Despite generally being more highly educated and skilled, new immigrants have difficulty finding work. The lack of Canadian experience, it's also known as social capital. This is one's network of support, your personal and professional contacts. Many of the immigrants left their social capital in their home country. Stereotyping is still very much in existence and affects immigrants' adaptation. Should an immigrant family need to have both father and mother work, the gender role conflict can be very challenging for some immigrants, where the gender roles for women can be very different from home country. In addition, there can be many factors related to different cultural norms, language, and the caring for older family members. Upon arrival, many immigrants live in ethnic neighborhoods that support cultural traditions. They're known as enclaves. And there are many enclaves. You will hear of Little Italy in Toronto. That's an example of an enclave where the vast majority of residents are people who have immigrated into Canada from Italy. Cultural practices can arouse condemnation if they are violating mainstream Canadian values. Immigration can also mean separation from family members. Female domestic workers often leave their children when they come to Canada on temporary visas to care for Canadian children and seniors. Children of immigrants may have difficulty growing up in the two cultures. Children trying to make their way in Canadian culture, trying to be more alike other Canadians, and family parents who might be having their foot in two different cultures might expect their children to adhere to more of the home culture too. There might be conflict as a result. So if we're going to be successful in having immigrants come to Canada, how are the services provided to immigrants? Well, demand's growing for service agencies to develop policies that are sensitive to cultural traditions of their clients, and many immigrants choose to go to relatives or ethnic organizations for help rather than to the mainstream agencies. There's an agreement between Aboriginal bands, and provincial and federal governments have permitted the formation of child welfare and family service agencies that are culturally sensitive to Indigenous people. So what are the theoretical perspectives about immigration? Let's look at our theories and see what they have to say. The structural functionalists, with a large number of people in society, change of our shared values and beliefs happens really slowly. This theory tends to support assimilation and melting pot acculturalization strategies, whereas conflict theory, since they focus on the social inequality brought on by those with power, are resisting change and exploiting minority groups. This theory tends to support segregation and exclusion as the acculturalization strategies. Feminist theory, unlike the conflict theorists who see economic inequity, the feminists view the role of genders inequalities, and this can be very much applies to new immigrants. The symbolic interactionalists, this theory explores the personal narrative. Their stories of immigrants share to gain understanding as to why an immigrant chooses one acultural strategy over another. And lastly, we'll just touch on the issue of difference when looking at family. Why is it important to be aware of difference between families? Difference does not equal inferiority. All individuals are shaped by family and cultural heritage, wider social context, our past experiences. Canadian population is being more diverse. A growing visible minority population is challenging governments and communities to remove barriers to equitable participation in social and economic life. We will all be affected by changes resulting from pressure for equal rights. Well, that completes part 2 of chapter 2. I hope this has gone well for you. Look forward to seeing you next week. Bye now.